Hello, everybody. My name is Sean Thom, and I am one of the staff representatives for CWA Local 1040. We're going to talk a little bit today about non-state grievance processes and kind of how that impacts you at your facility, and then also give kind of a broader overview so you have an idea of what the process kind of entails. All right, so let's talk about what a grievance actually is, right? So in a union workplace, a grievance usually refers to the employer not complying with the terms of the collective bargaining agreement, right? That's a grievance, that's an issue, that's a problem that we have because our employers are not doing what they said they would do in writing that we all agreed upon. So when we file a grievance, that's a signal to management that, hey, there's a problem. There's an issue in our workplace that needs to be addressed, right? And we need you to do what your responsibility is as management, as the employer, to make sure this is handled appropriately. So each worksite contract has a grievance process that both the union and management must follow, or they're in violation of the contract. All right. So a lot of times we just feel like, management has to follow the contract, but we as the union also have to follow the contract. If we're not following the contract, then, there are issues with us too. There are consequences we're going to have to face just like they are. So make sure you remember that. All right, so a grievance can also be contractual or non-contractual. That's important distinctions to have here. So a contractual grievance states that a specific section of the contract was violated by an individual's actions or the company's actions, right? That's a specific part of the contract was not followed, right? So that's a contractual violation. But we also have non-contractual grievances, right? So that's an issue that occurs that's not specific to the contract, but needs to be mitigated through the formal grievance process, right? There's an issue going on at work, stuff that's happening, you don't think stuff's being done correctly. So you've tried having conversations and it's not working. So you need to put it into a grievance so that management can be aware and they can kind of start that process to hopefully be able to, get this situation resolved. All right. So big difference between contractual and non-contractual, and you need to be able to recognize that moving forward. All right, so let's talk about who actually files the grievance, right? Who actually files the grievance at your workplace? So a shop steward, a union member, or the local itself can file the grievance, right? So any of our members at a worksite can file a grievance on their own. As a shop steward, you can file the grievance on their behalf, or as the local, we can file a grievance on your behalf. And in my time as a staff rep, I have filed grievances at our non-state facilities on behalf of our members. Whether it's unfair labor practice or things like that, we all absolutely do that if we need to. All right, so ideally, we would like our members to write and file the grievance, but we also recognize that this is something that not many members are comfortable doing. In that case, we, as a union, we as shop stewards must assist in that process, right? We want our members to file it because that brings the most power. That tells management, listen, this member feels like there was an issue. Now this member is standing up and fighting for what's right and what's appropriate, okay? So it sends a very clear message. But, we absolutely can and must help in that process. So if a member doesn't feel comfortable submitting a grievance in their name, the steward or local can file the grievance on their behalf, provided they have all the required information. Okay, like I said, some members just don't feel comfortable. They're concerned about potential backlash, retribution, retaliation, things along those lines. So, they want us to file it for them, and that's okay. We can do that, but we need to make sure that we understand the situation as thoroughly as possible because we are representing our members, and we need to make sure that we have all that down and ready to go so that we don't miss anything. Now, this is really important. And, I've seen a lot of issues with some grievances that get submitted and just being just off the rails, right? So before grievance is submitted to management, it should be reviewed by the steward to ensure completion and accuracy. So hopefully you have a relationship with the members at your work site that they're coming to you and telling you if they want to file a grievance. And now hopefully they feel comfortable enough now to talk to you and let you review that grievance before it gets filed. There's a lot of, important reasons for this that we're going to get into, but you should always be able to review grievances to make sure that your member is asking for the correct things. So when do we actually file a grievance? All right, so a grievance can be filed whenever an unfair practice or act in the workplace occurs that a union member would like to challenge or have addressed. All right, so if there's stuff that's going on, whether it's a violation of the contract, it's an unfair practice, thing along those lines, we can file a grievance. We don't have to wait, right? Just do it. Now, it's important to know that grievances must be filed in a timely manner from when the incident happened or when the member became aware of a specific incident, right? So sometimes we have members who may get overlooked for a promotion, seniority wasn't followed, and posting overtime opportunities, right? So if we're going to grieve that, it's not necessarily from a date in which the incident happened, but when the member was actually became aware of that specific thing. All right, so we have to make sure we understand those deadlines, completely, to make sure we're not missing out on things. All right, because each contract has a very different timeline for filing a grievance and must be adhered to. All right, I have some of my sites where the grievance timeline is 2 weeks from the date of an incident, where it's 1 week, where it's 30 days, where it's 15 business days, where it's 15 calendar days, right? All the contracts are different. So it's up to you to make sure that you know the timelines for filing a grievance. It is essential in your role as a shop steward. Because if the contractual timelines are not followed, the grievance can get thrown out and completely voided by management. And management can say, well, listen, your grievance wasn't filed timely. It doesn't matter. And in our situations with a lot of our private sites where a grievance is also allows us to challenge disciplinary matters, if we are not following that timely, then that discipline actions, they can stick and we may not be able to do anything about it. And that's would be incredibly unfortunate, especially in a situation where we may have been able to overturn that for the member. All right, so we expect management to follow the contract. And if we expect them to, we have to as well. If our stewards, you, fail to file the grievance punctually, and if you don't follow the timeline, it impacts our members negatively. It impacts their working situations negatively, and it impacts our union. It impacts our membership. It impacts our strength. All right, so this is why we're doing this training. This is why you are a shop steward, because you have earned the trust of the local to be able to do this for our members. So I said this is one of the most important things, to be able to understand the timelines and make sure this stuff gets done appropriately and correctly. All right, so where do we actually file a grievance, right? We want to file a grievance. What actually happens? What do we actually do with that, all right? So grievances must be filed with the appropriate entity as outlined in the work site contract. Every single work site contract has a very specific grievance process that must be followed here, okay? Every single one. All right, so we have to keep that in mind, and it's going to tell us, where it's going to be filed and who it gets filed with. So each contract is different, but most contracts involve filing agreements with somebody in HR. All right. So again, it's just, as a steward, it's your responsibility to know who that completed grievance needs to go to. If we file agreements with the wrong individual or the wrong department, that can lead to a processing delay. All right. This could jeopardize the grievance as a whole, especially if a delay results in exceeding the submission timeline. All right. So if you send it to the wrong person, and you have 2 weeks to submit it, and you're just inside that 2-week window, and you send it to the wrong department, and now it takes them a day or two to respond, like, no, this needs to go over here, and now it takes you a day to get back to that, to actually check that email, and now we're past that deadline. We've got nothing to do. There's nothing we can do. We can't challenge that. We could ask management to accept it, but at the end of the day, if we didn't follow the contract, it's a wrap, right? So just keep that in mind. We need to know where it gets filed and who it gets filed to. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why we file a grievance, right? A grievance is the best, and in most situations, the only tool that we have to fight for the rights of our members in their respective workplaces, all right? A grievance is the most powerful thing that we can do, to make sure that we're standing up for our members, that our members are being respected, and the appropriate things are happening as demanded and outlined in our contracts, right? So without the grievance process, we would be forced to rely on management to do the right thing when presented with an issue. Now, if we could rely on management to do the right thing when presented with an issue, none of us would be here right now, right? We wouldn't have unions, but obviously we can't. And this is why we have a union, to make sure we can stand up for ourselves and make sure we stand up for our members. All right, and this grievance process is what allows us to do that. Now, this is something that comes up a lot when I talk to members. Members will call the local with issues, and I'll say, "Well, have you filed a grievance?" We talk to their shop steward, and the response will be no. Say, okay, well, listen, you may not want to file the grievance. You may be fearful. They may retaliate against you, or you may be labeled as a troublemaker. But without filing that grievance, how do you stand up for yourself? How do we stand up for other members? How do we ensure that what you experience as a member does not happen to the rest of our members, right? And it's really important for our members to understand this. And as a shop steward, it's really important for you to be able to, to outline that for them, because they need to understand that this tool is what we have. And management would want to label people, but that's what they do to deter people from filing a grievance. And this is something that I learned very quickly in my union days. But when you're in doubt, file a grievance, right? Even if it ultimately ends up being unfounded, and it gets denied, or if you file the grievance and it turns out nothing was wrong, file it anyway. That's why they're there, right? File it anyway. Cannot stress that enough, seriously. All right, so let's talk about how you actually write a grievance, all right? So, I've seen a lot of different grievances come my way. I was a shop steward, I was a branch president, so I've experienced a lot of these things, and I've seen some of the grievances that come through. And, it's important for you as a shop steward to understand how a grievance gets written so that you can, help our members and make sure that when they get submitted, they're done properly. All right, so first, you need to use your site grievance form. All right, do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not have a member email a grievance, an email to HR and say, "This is my grievance." No, they don't have to accept that. I literally just did this yesterday for a member, and asked them to submit it on the proper site grievance form. That's important. That's part of the process. That's what the contract lays out. So we have to follow that. All right, so a lot of the grievance processes, especially for non-state sites, right? They really rely on the ability of the steward or whoever's writing the grievance to write a compelling argument, right? So some sites don't actually have a hearing process. Some of my sites, you don't go to a hearing, you don't go back and forth with the steward being the rep for the member and then going against management. A lot of our sites don't have that. A lot of sites, the way it's built into the contract is you write the grievance up and it gets sent up the chain of management and it has to be reviewed. And then it gets decided based off that, right? So the initial grievance, the initial writing might be your only chance to really depict the issues and the resolution that's desired, right? So that argument has to be compelling. It has to be complete. It has to be thorough. And going there, right? Be thorough, but succinct. All right, so you need to clearly state that the issue that is being grieved and the desired resolution. We don't need you to write a 3-page grievance unless it takes you 3 pages to explain the situation. Now, if you know that this is going to go to a hearing, you want to be thorough, but you want to be short, sweet, and simple. You want to give them too much information. If you know that your site doesn't really have a hearing process, then you need to make sure that this is thorough and no matter how long it needs to be, that's fine. Have it be as long as it needs to be to make sure that everything gets clearly communicated. Now, we really want you to look at and outline how the alleged actions are actually directly impact the member, okay? So, I don't want you to just say that a member was overlooked for overtime. This member was not able to get this overtime that they should have had based on seniority. So this negatively impacted their ability, to earn money for their family, right? Something like that is great, right? But we really want you to outline how that impacts the member. That's very clear. It's not just, the actions happen. It's what was the impact, because if we outline the impact properly, then that's going to help us in the resolution process. Now, if it's a contractual grievance, you have to detail what parts of the contract were violated and also explain how they were violated. It's not just enough to say that, Article 1, Section 2 of the contract was violated because they didn't do this. No, you need to explain how it was actually violated, what happened that violated that, right? This is how you prove any wrongdoing to management. This is how you say, listen, you didn't follow this, you didn't do this, and the contract clearly outlines this, and this isn't what happened, right? So this is where, you have to be specific with this, right? And you got to really detail that. Now, when you're writing, and I know a lot of times with grievances and when members are experiencing issues, especially wrongdoing that that we know happens from management, it's really easy for emotion to kind of play a part in this, right? We're frustrated, we're upset, we're angry, we're irritated, we're hurt, we're shocked. Like, these are all emotions that we deal with, when we're filing grievances. I know I filed them personally myself, right? My first grievance I ever filed was for retaliation from my boss. And so I know what kind of feelings can get stuck in these things, right? So this is why it's really important to stick to the facts when you're writing a grievance or when you're helping a member write their grievance, right? You want to stay away from opinions and feelings and beliefs. It's not I feel or I think, right? Stick to the facts. This is what happened. This is what was violated. All right. Grievances are won based on the facts outlined, not on somebody's feelings or opinions. All right. Just that, you got to look at this, and I don't want to scare you and say, think about, from it's a court perspective, but, court proceedings are won and lost based on facts and what you can prove. The same with a grievance. Grievances are won based off of what you can successfully prove to have happened and to be violated. All right. So that's why you need to stick with the facts and not necessarily, rely on beliefs and opinions and things along those lines. All right. All right. So before I get into this, like I said earlier, I've seen some things when it comes to writing of grievances. So I wanted to give you an example of something that I thought was, a grievance statement and resolution that really needed to be adjusted, and something that was much more thorough. And I kind of made it on the same topic, and you'll see what that is. So this is an example of the grievance that needs a little bit of work, right? So the grievance on 2/24/23. My supervisor retaliated against me for filing a grievance because seniority was not followed for assigning overtime. He told me that he can do whatever he wants because he is the boss and I can't do anything about it. Resolution: give me my money and tell my supervisor to stop messing with me and suspend him. All right. So, you look at that and it's not very clear as to what the resolution actually is, right? Give me my money. Well, what money? Tell my supervisor to stop messing with me and suspend him. All right. Well, you can't ask for your managers and supervisors to be suspended as part of your resolution. That's not how the grievance process works at all. Okay. So I really need you to understand that you can't advocate for discipline against somebody in a grievance resolution. All right. But this could be much more specific. All right. So let's look at this side. All right, so you look over here. It says on 2/24/23, my supervisor, Steve Smith, retaliated against me for a previous grievance that I filed regarding him not following the overtime policy as outlined in the contract. On 2/25/23, he told me that even though I won the grievance, that he would still not follow the contract and he would assign OT to who he wanted. Mr. Smith continues to not follow Article A3.7 in the contract regarding assignment of overtime. And you see the difference between that and the grievance statement for the other one? It goes into detail about what happened. It talks about a previous grievance that was filed, right? And it goes into that detail about what that grievance was about and what was, what the situation was. It talked about the fact that that member won the grievance, right? But that the contract is still not being followed. So the resolution says to be reimbursed for the OT that I missed as a result of Mr. Smith continuously not following the contract. Mr. Smith, and I know you can't see that because of my face there, but Mr. Smith should also be retrained on how OT should be offered to ensure that this does not happen again. Okay, so they're not saying that Mr. Smith should be suspended or get in trouble or anything like that. They're saying, listen, I'm going to be reimbursed for the overtime that I missed as a result of Mr. Smith not following the contract. And they're also asking for Mr. Smith to be retrained on how OT works. Now, the whole retraining thing may or may not happen. However, it shows management that, listen, we know that we get retrained when we do something incorrectly, when we need that. So maybe Mr. Smith needs it. And, we don't want him necessarily disciplined, but we want him to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And that's why it's important to put in there as well to ensure that this does not happen again. That's telling management, listen, you know what? You cannot continue to violate the contract here. You cannot do it. And if you're going to do it, then we're going to continue filing these grievances, and eventually it's going to get up to the local, and you'd be filing a continuous unfair labor practice, which could potentially land the management and the organization in hot water. All right, so you can clearly see the differences here between these, and This is why we want you to be specific. We want you to be thorough and succinct, okay? Now, this is a write-up for the grievance that you just saw, okay? Now, you're going to have a very basic grievance statement and resolution, but you should always include a write-up of some sort, right? So I'll read this out loud so you guys can, get an idea, and you just follow along with me. All right, so in 2/24/23, my immediate supervisor, Steve Smith, did not offer OT based on seniority and instead gave it to his friend, Billy Bungles. I previously filed a grievance that was sustained, which means won, on December 10th, 2022 for Mr. Smith doing the same thing. When I heard that Mr. Bungles was again receiving overtime over me, I sent a text message to Mr. Smith's phone on 2/25/23 asking why the policy was still not being followed. Mr. Smith responded that he is the supervisor and he determines who gets OT. He also told me that he would continue to skip over me since I was a troublemaker and got him disciplined from my last grievance. I asked him to please follow the contract and allow me to work overtime shifts as dictated by seniority, but he sent me a laughing emoji and ignored subsequent texts. Included with this grievance are the screenshots from our text message conversation. To be clear, I am asking to be paid for the overtime that I missed, that I should have been able to work, since Mr. Smith continues to ignore the contract and operates however he sees fit. Additionally, I am asking for Mr. Smith to be retrained to hopefully prevent any additional contractual violations in the future. All right, so this is written in a way that really explains the entire situation from top to bottom. This happened previously. I filed a grievance. The grievance was won. I then found out it was happening again, so I reached out to my supervisor trying to ask him to follow the policy. He told me he wasn't going to follow the policy because, he didn't like me. I'm a troublemaker, blah, 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 blah. And again, when you look at that, this individual again asked to follow the contract and allowed a member to work the overtime shifts as dictated by seniority. And at this point, Mr. Smith then sent a laughing emoji and ignored all text after that. So, they're very clear in what happened. They're clear in what they're asking for. And this is a great write-up, right? I hope this is something that you use as an example. And it's important here they mention as well that included in this is the documentation. It's the screenshots of the text, all right? Because, and I want to mention this too, and something you can definitely talk to your members about. If it's not documented, if it's not in writing, it never happens. It's their word versus yours, all right? So, always encourage your members to do everything they can to get things in writing, because then that makes it easier for us to challenge things like this. In this situation, Mr. Smith was obviously pretty ticked off and did not like this member. And, let that be known in the text messages. And, listen, this may seem crazy and like it doesn't happen, but at least some of my members at my sites can attest that this isn't that far-fetched, and that, they do have supervisors and managers that would act as childish as this. All right, so, just try keeping that in mind. All right, so lastly, a couple best practices for filing grievances and just grievances in general, okay? So, and this I can't stress this enough. This is probably one of the more important parts of the grievance process is you have to maintain confidentiality. All right, when you discuss a grievance with a member, it has to remain confidential. All right, you cannot share details with anybody else without the permission of the member. I'm telling you, you don't go to anybody else. You don't talk to management about it. You don't talk to other stewards about it. You don't talk to other members about it. This is a confidential process. You need to remember that. All right, now if the first step of your grievance process involves a meeting with management to discuss the grievances, the member must be a part of the process. A steward should never meet with management to discuss a grievance without the grievance. I have seen this happen in sites where a grievance gets filed and management will meet with the steward to try coming up with a resolution, but the member who filed the grievance is not present, right? And obviously that is a huge issue. It's a huge no-no. The member should always be present because they are the one who filed the grievance. They need to be happy with any sort of resolution that comes. And the backroom conversations that may happen between management and the steward, don't help us. It does not help to build transparency or trust, and it doesn't build good relationships with our members. So remember, the grievant must always be present for these conversations. All right, now I've mentioned this before. I'll say it again. You need to know the grievance timeline like the back of your hand. All right, if you're representing a member in a grievance, it is your responsibility to ensure that all timelines are followed. If a grievance gets tossed because of a failure to follow the timelines, that's bad for the member and for our union as a whole. All right, so you have to know that timeline. If you're representing a member, it is on you as the shop steward to ensure that all the timelines are followed. If they're not followed and a grievance gets thrown out, you can be held liable and responsible as the local for that. All right, so you really need to make sure that you know that. And if you read the contract, it doesn't take much, to really become an expert at this. I know it may seem a little bit overwhelming, but it's really not. All right, now we want you to submit all your supporting documentation when a grievance is filed. All right, especially in our processes where there is no hearing. All right, submit all the documentation when it's filed. Right, don't assume they're going to ask you for that documentation if they need it. More often than not, management is more likely to just rule based on the information that was provided. All right, so if you go back to the example that I gave you and the write-up that I gave you, if the write-up was great, but if they didn't submit the screenshots of the text messages, the management may not even ever look at that. They may just say, okay, well, there's no real evidence here, and leave it at that. They might, if you have good managers and good, they may ask for the documentation, but they might not. All right, so that's why it's incumbent on us to submit everything when it gets filed. And lastly, and I can't stress this to everybody enough, all right, if you have questions or if you need help, ask one of your branch officers or ask your staff representative for help. That's why we're here. You are not alone in this process, right? Whether you're a new steward or a steward that's been doing it for 10 to 15 years, you're not alone. Questions pop up. New things happen all the time, things you would never even imagine happening and popping up, but it does. All right, so reach out, ask for help if you need it. That's what we are here for. If any of my members, you can ask any member, any of my stewards, any of my branch officers that I've ever spoken to about grievances, and they're always like, "Oh, you're always around, you're always available." And I remind them, your dues pay my salary. Okay, our members' dues are what allow us to be the union that we are. It's what allows us to do what we need to do to protect them. If we don't follow this process, if we fail our members, they are going to withdraw. And then we struggle to exist as a union without our members. All right, so if you have a question, don't assume you know the answer. You need help, don't think that you're out there by yourself. Ask for that help. All right, that is what we are here for. All right, so thank you for listening. Any questions, feel free to reach out to me at the local. Again, my name is Thom, and I am one of the staff reps here at 1040. Thanks, everybody. Be well.